Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of these aggressive tiger bass. And you can tell that spring is in the air because we have new babies everywhere. We got 2 new baby eaglets, baby ducks in the creek back behind the pond, and spawning bass. But if you missed the last video, we did an electrofishing survey, and I was blown away by the size of some of the bass living in this pond. But by far, the most popular comment in that video is what happened to the 2 pet bass, Bonnie and Clyde. So I dedicated this entire past week to answering this question, and we're even going to be fishing with one of their favorite foods, a big crawfish, to try to catch them in this video. But if you're new to the channel, Bonnie and Clyde were our first 2 pet bass, and really what got this whole thing started. So several years ago, me and Liz were fishing on the Delta, and caught Bonnie and Clyde off the same tree, and we decided to keep them as pets. And we started them out in a 55-gallon aquarium, but they outgrew it pretty quick, so we moved them over to a 300-gallon aquarium where they lived for the next year. And that's when we decided we wanted to build them a pond in our backyard. So we worked with Aquascape to build this beauty, and they lived in the backyard for a few years while we were building their final destination, the 5-acre pond. So in May of 23, we transferred them to the Crimson Oak Pond, where they swam off and have yet to be seen. And we did put a pit tag in each of them, so that if we caught them in the future, we would know it was them. But to be honest, I'm not really surprised that we haven't caught Bonnie and Clyde, because when they were in the aquariums in the backyard pond, we gave them a college education on artificial baits. So we own a tackle shop, and the best way to figure out which baits work are to remove the hooks and put it in front of the bass themselves. So over the years, they've seen it all. Jigs, crankbaits, topwater lures, you name it, they've seen it. So I always knew that catching them on an artificial bait wasn't going to be so easy, and that we would probably need to use one of their favorite baits like a crawfish or a big golden shiner if we ever wanted to catch them. But we did have one other way of tracking them, and that's by scanning their pit tags. So we installed this control panel with a data collector and attached 2 antennas that we would put underwater, so that if either Bonnie or Clyde ever swam near or through the antenna, we would get a ping and it would be stored in our database. So we installed this system last spring and began testing it with other fish, and the pings and data started coming in, but at that time we had never gotten a ping from Bonnie or Clyde. Well, it had been about 6 months since we had checked the latest data, and after all the questions we got in the last video, I wanted to pull that data and see if Bonnie or Clyde had shown up. So the new data started around September, and as I was scrolling down through the list, look who showed up, Mr. Clyde himself. We got a single ping from Clyde on the oak throne antenna on 11/26/24 at 5:41 p.m. And after scanning through the rest of the data, no signs of Bonnie. But for me, I was happy to see proof of life, and now determined more than ever to catch one of them. But as I mentioned, those antennas are right there at the dock, so if the fish never hang out in that area, they're not going to show up in the database. And as you can see, there's a lot of other structure and places for fish to hang out in the pond. But that got me thinking about this big fish that was always hanging out around the green light. If you'll notice, one of the fish here is double the size of the rest of the bass. But I hadn't put too much thought into it until during the electrofishing survey, we netted this giant bass from directly beneath the dock, and it didn't have a tag. But there were several people that commented in the last video asking if there was any chance that that was Bonnie. So then that got me thinking, well, it was the second biggest fish in the pond, weighing in at 6.56 pounds, which would track with about what Bonnie should weigh, but something would have had to happen to her pit tag. So while it's not very likely, there is a small chance that the pit tag we installed in her is defective or quit working after a period of time, and another really small chance that the pit tag worked itself out before the scales had healed over. So again, how could we figure out if this big bass that's been living right here under the dock, twice the size of all the other bass in the pond, is Bonnie or not? And so I spent several hours going back through old video footage of Bonnie, looking for any markers or patterns on her that might stand out. And the only thing I noticed that stood out was that Bonnie has a V-shaped gill plate, as where a lot of basses are rounded off right there. Hers almost makes a perfect 90-degree angle, and there's also a big black spot, almost like it was drawn in with a marker. So then I compared that to photos of the mystery fish, and while there's still a lot of uncertainty, I would say it's a possibility. This fish has that same V shape, as well as that spot with a black marker look. So again, not really conclusive evidence, but there is a small chance that it could be Bonnie. But I'd like to know your thoughts. Leave me a comment down below if you think it's Bonnie or no chance. But in the last video, I asked you all to help me name this unknown fish, and Mr. Jeff said we should name it Ghost, which I think is a fitting name. It's either a ghost because we've never caught the fish before, or it's the ghost of Bonnie. And here's a couple more facts from the data we collected from the pit tag scanners. Xena, Luna, and Excalibur visited the oak throne antenna the most. But the data I always find the most interesting is the most active hour between September and December was 11 o'clock at night. So one of our next goals is to get some power out to the island so we can distribute some more antennas in the deeper water and have a better coverage of the pond. So now let's go check in on Cedar Falls and what I call my happy place. But filming out here at this pond has been relentless this spring. I feel like we've had about 50-mile-an-hour sustained winds every day. But now that the weather's warmed up, Jake the snake has come out of hiding, and my goodness, he's gotten big. I feel like he's doubled in length. Out here just sunning on one of the aqua blue stones. And this is how you know we're in full spawn mode. We got one of the bass up there at the base of the waterfall in about 8 inches of water trying to spawn. And I hate to break it to this bass, but that's probably not the best place for a nest. I feel like the current is just going to wash those eggs right out of the nest. Not to mention, that's where the golden shiners hang out, and they're known to be nest raiders, so hands down the worst spawning spot you could have picked. This is a much better spot for a bed, one of the lily pots that another bass is building a nest in. But just because it's spawning season does not mean that they lose their aggression. Anytime I come out here around the pond, you're sure to see some fireworks. And now that we've gotten a couple more bass in here, they're always in competition mode. And when I see things like this, it makes me think this would be a perfect pond for Moby. But here in the southeast, we got a ton of rain the past couple weeks, and I love seeing the baby ducks floating down the creek. At first glance, I thought it might have been echo, but I'm pretty sure this is a wood duck. Leave me a comment down below if that's what you think it is. But after raining for 2 days straight, all the animals are coming out during daylight, trying to dry off, and just hoping to get a little bit of sunshine. But I knew when I got this video showing the flooded creeks and the raccoons easing through hunting crawfish, that it was time to go set my crawfish traps. So I set a few down in the deeper parts of the creeks, waited a couple days, then went and checked them, and now we have a bucket full of crawfish. So the first thing I want to do is feed some of them to the bass over in Cedar Falls, and then this afternoon we're going to come back with some of the bigger jumbo crawfish and try to catch Bonnie or Clyde. So I'm really interested to see how these fish are going to react. They've only seen crawfish a couple times in their life, but I know that smallmouth bass love crawfish. Look at here, we got Johnny, June, and Tiger in full feeding mode. Got him. Sometimes I don't think it would matter what I drop down in here. They're so used to me feeding them that they're gonna attack it. But out in the wild, crawfish are one of the common sources of food for a bass, and they have really high nutritional value. They're high in protein and they're a high energy food. And they're also really easy for them to hunt. Crawfish are much slower than a bait fish, so if they don't have rocks and places to hide, they become an easy meal. And in general, a bass would have to eat 10 pounds of bait fish to gain 1 pound, but with crawfish, they only have to eat 5 pounds to gain 1 pound. And many of you may not have known this, but crawfish will eat bass eggs. So during this time of the year, any type of crawfish or salamander is a natural enemy of a bass, and even if they're not hungry, they'll eat it just to keep it away from their nest. And I wish we could stock crawfish in the 5-acre pond, but the clay liner prevents us from doing that, so that's why we always grow the prawns. And just a heads up, we're going to be stocking the prawn pond here in the next couple of weeks. So you could tell after the bass had eaten a crawfish or two, it filled them up much quicker than the golden shiners would, and they started leaving them alone after I dropped them down in the water. And as you see a couple of them sitting right here on this rock, our spotted bass had not eaten a crawfish yet, almost like it's the first time he had ever seen one, and he kept circling around to it, trying it out, but just wasn't fully committed to eat one of the last remaining crawfish. There he's getting an up-close look at him, thinking about eating them one more time. And we even had 2 of our smallest bass in this pond stop by and take a look, but the crawfish is too big for them to eat. But watch what happens when Smalley the smallmouth bass comes around. You can see Spot trying to block Smalley off from getting access to the crawfish, but he wasn't successful. Smalley said, "I'm not giving that one a second chance." Alright, saving this big guy for the fishing trip this afternoon. So you guys know how much research I do when it comes to ponds and fish, and I've been using this new browser called Opera One R2, and it's got some pretty incredible features that make my life much easier. For instance, I've been doing research on the gizzard shad and comparing it to a golden shiner, and they have a split screen feature that lets me have 2 tabs open side by side, which is really nice when you're trying to compare 2 different species. But by far one of my favorite features within Opera is their built-in AI that's called Aria. And you know I had to ask Arya The million-dollar question: what happened to our two pet bass we call Bonnie and Clyde? I was really surprised at all the details it gave me, and even started back to its origins. It also mentioned the spawn back when they were in our backyard pond, as well as nailing the date on when we released them into the 5-acre pond. And then down there at the bottom, Arya says it seems like Bonnie and Clyde are enjoying their new home and living their best lives. And there's other cool features built in, like an image generator. You can tell it to create photos of things like the Toad Dangler t-shirt that we had in the past. I'll have to say that's a pretty cool shot. But not only can it generate images, it can also recognize images. So I uploaded a photo of that gizzard shad we caught in the pond, and its answer was dead on. And if you're like me and like to have multiple tabs open, they've got a really nice way of organizing these tabs called tab islands. So you can group the different tabs together and then expand or collapse that group whenever you need to. And another nice feature is called tab traces. You'll see a little underscore on the tab that you've recently used. And they've also got a built-in floating music player, and you can move it around the screen or even drag it outside of the browser completely, and it has 6 different streaming services built into it. But Opera One R2 is fully customizable. You can select your favorite theme and even adjust the colors by dragging the slider around, and you'll see those changes in real time. So as you can see, lots of cool features with the Opera browser. If you want to try it out, I'll put a link down in the video description. But here's a good clear shot of 2 small bass spawning, and this video is a perfect example of the spawning process. And once the nest is built and the female's ready, the male bass begins nudging the female, and she'll turn sideways and even almost vertical at times. And that's their mating ritual, and soon after she'll lay the eggs in the nest, and the male's job is to fertilize the eggs, and as they hatch and become fry, protect the nest from all the predators. And here's another shot of some bass and bluegills hanging out around a nest, and this becomes a very stressful time for the fish as they're on high alert all day long. And we all know what comes in the next phase of this process: tens of thousands of little bass fry. If you look closely, those tiny white fish are 1 to 2 day old bass, and when it comes to statistics, they have some absolute horrible odds of making it to an adult size. And out of all those tiny fry you saw, maybe 2 or 3 make it to an adult. But if you ever want to know if the bass are spawning in your pond, walk out there right before dark this time of year, and if the water's calm, you'll see those little ripples across the surface, and those are your bass fry. But the bass aren't the only ones that have started mating. We've always seen them drawn to the waterfalls in the backyard pond and at Cedar Falls, but this year they seem to be hanging out around the 5-acre pond more. And this time of year is migrating season for the ospreys, so throughout the week we'll see several different ospreys stop by, diving down trying to catch one of the fish. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, they are very accurate and have a high success rate. But the one good thing about having a nesting pair of bald eagles is that the eagles do not want to share their food source with the ospreys, so they're pretty good at running them off. And as you can see here, Mama and Daddy Eagle flying around early one morning trying to catch some food for the babies. And in the last video, we showed you that the eagles built a nest about 200 yards away from the pond and have 2 baby eaglets, and we asked you all what we should name them, and we settled on Maverick and Iceman for the baby eaglets. I feel like that's a fitting name for these two. Can't wait to see them flying around here in the next couple weeks. But if you're a pond owner and you have all of these bird predators, that's why it's even more important to fertilize your pond. And we did that a couple of weeks ago. And earlier this week, we measured it to be about 22.5 inches. And you can see how when that water visibility is less than 2 feet, it makes it a lot harder for those predators to spot the fish in the shallow water. And then I came back just a couple days later, measured it again, and we were under 22 inches. So that's a really good sign and indicator that we're getting that plankton bloom, which makes it a fertile pond for the fish, and the best defense you can have for the ospreys. And hey, look who it is. It's Foxy the fox squirrel. It's been a few months since I've seen Foxy. It's always good to see him hopping out here in the field. And Foxy used to be a regular when we had the fields full of peanuts, but now he just stops by from time to time. And now it's time for an update on the shop build. This week we're going to be painting the 2 office and room areas. Started out with a base layer white, then came back with a nice neutral color. Went with a light green in the bathrooms. And next up we're going to be working on trim. So we're staining all of our trim, and this is a walnut color. And there's a good look at all the wood after it's stained. And here's a good look after we got it installed. I think the 2 colors go perfect together. It's a great camp house type feel. You can see they got one of the windows framed out. Over here we got some closet doors. We still have to stain those. And moving into the bathroom, getting some of that trim put up. So everything's moving along nicely. And for one of the walls in the rooms, we're going to do the V-groove pine, and we stained it in that same color, and it's going to become like a wooden accent wall. So folks, I went back down to the pond, and the toads and frogs have been working overtime. I've never seen so many tadpoles in my life. The bluegills in this pond are going to have an absolute feast, especially as these things get a little bit bigger. But to be honest, I feel like the frogs and toads knew the best location in the pond for these little guys because they put them right here back in this shallow pocket where the water's only a couple inches deep right now. And you can see the predators out there picking the ones off in the deeper water. But for all of these guys tucked back here away in this grass, they should be pretty safe and have a good chance of survival. So one of the things I love doing is hanging out around these bluegill feeders because you never know what you're going to see this time of year. You got a wide variety of fish, and if you pay attention, the ones with the little dark black tails, like this little guy, are tiny largemouth bass. And he's cruising along looking for something to eat, but most of these minnows and bluegills are too big for him, and every once in a while they'll snag a little pellet. But a lot of those small fish are actually the ones being hunted. Each time these feeders go off, the bluegills pile in, and the big bass will ambush them from beneath. So we'll see some flying bluegills, as well as an aerial assault from the eagles. And man, this week we got some really cool shots of the eagles swooping down. They really are a majestic bird. But they have to feed those babies about 10 times a day. So you see the mama and daddy out here working, especially when the feeders go off. But here pretty soon I'll have to take the kids out to catch some bluegills and see how big they've gotten. Because if you guys remembered, they were the very first fish to ever get stocked into this pond and have gotten a heavy dose of protein pellets since day one. And we have a little bit of an advantage down south because a lot of people from central Alabama north all turn their feeders off for 3 to 4 months out of the year. But for us, we've kept the feeders going the last 365 days, and there was only one time right there during the snowstorm that the fish quit eating, but it was only for a day and not long enough to turn the feeders off. So in other words, we have an extra long growing season here. But now let's check in on some swamp cameras. Got some big bucks down there making his way across the creek. And hey, look, we got Foxy the fox squirrel. This is the first time I've ever seen him down in the swamp. He's doing a tightrope across one of the fallen cedar trees, so he doesn't have to get wet. Another buck cruising by. You can tell he did a little fighting this past rut. And there's Peter Cottontail. And it looks like we got the whole herd of them crossing the creek. And Mr. Raccoon investigating the cameras. A nighttime flyer, I'm guessing that's Hooter the Owl, and some deer munching on that green growth. And look who it is, we got Flip Flop, the deer who's always got both ears curled back. Also enjoying some snacks down at the creek. Raccoon coming down out of the tree, headed out on their nightly hunt. And look at there, one of the fawns we call Dasher and Dancer is a male, starting to get the little knots on his head. And Chip collecting some acorns before they all float away. Now for an update on the longleaf pine trees. So several weeks back we did a control burn, and I was a little bit worried that some of the areas got too hot and may have damaged the pine trees. But I'm happy to say that all of them survived and are putting on that new growth. But most importantly, some of them are beginning to come out of that grass stage and start growing vertically, and this is also the time of year they're candling. But a longleaf can stay in that grass stage for 7 to 10 years, so that control burn helps push them out of it and into what's called the bottle brush stage. But you can see here on the edge of the road, some of these older pines are doing what's known as candling, and that's where they grow those vertical shoots, and that helps with their new growth each year. So pretty happy with the results from the control burn. We should see some actual trees here soon. But speaking of tree updates, all of our oak trees are starting to put on leaves. You can see that entire row of them down there is doing pretty good. Our cypress trees are also starting to grow out their needles. And a couple weeks ago we fertilized the oak tree on Alcatraz Island, and it's looking much better. Hopefully we'll get some good growth out of that guy this year. Alright folks, we got some crawfish that we trapped down in the creek. Time to do a little fishing with the sole goal in mind of catching Bonnie or Clyde. They're smart now, probably only going to get tricked on live baits, so a big old live crawfish may just do the trick. So for the setup today, we're just going light line, small hook. We're going to try to go as finesse as possible to trick the bass. Hook them right through the tail so they can still use their pinchers. Alright, here we go. Got him. Oh yeah. Putting up a good fight. No giant, though. Got him. Nice one. Right over here in this wind-blown bank. Alright, this fish has been caught, 570601. and it weighs 2.31. And this fish is named Quasimodo. It's been caught 6 times now. And check that out. The last 3 times all from the grass on the west bank. We know where this fish lives. Oh, here we go. That felt like a good hit. Got him. Still can't tell how big it is. Shaking its head. Gotta figure out which side of this tree it's gonna go to. Oh yeah, big one. There we go. Get away from that tree. Look at that crawfish hanging out of the mouth. And that's a nice bass. Alright, this fish has been caught 5'7", 1094, and it weighs 2.91, almost a 3-pounder. And this is Van Dam, the 5th time we caught it. It's lost a little bit of weight since we caught it 1 month ago, which is perfectly normal this time of year during the spawn. So if you ever fish with live crawfish, you have to have some patience. But if you can see, it's one of the most realistic techniques, as you just give that crawfish freedom to crawl around down there on the bottom until he's seen by one of those bass. Alright, here we go. Got a good thump. Oh yeah, good one. Oh yeah, look at it. Oh yeah, pull and drag on the crawfish. Love it. Nice one. Come on in here. That one put up a fight, that's for sure. Alright, this fish has been caught 232853. She weighs 2.13 pounds. And here we have Gil, a 2nd generation bass, and the 3rd time we've caught it. Wow, look at that, a little bluegill got knocked up on the bank. That's awesome. Bass just chased him out right here in front of me. Alright, we're gonna help you out, little buddy. There you go. There we go. Got one. Got him. Look at him down there. Wow. There's a couple of them. Alright, this fish is 5'7", 0194. It weighs 2.55 pounds. And here we have Xavier, which is getting close to holding the record for getting caught the most. This is the 7th time, and she lost a little bit of weight since she spawned the past few weeks. Here's one. Right on the dock. Got him. Feels like a pretty good one. Oh yeah. Crawfish eater. Came out from under the dock. Pull a little drag, man. Go back over here. It's a good one. Came out from under the dock. Alright, this fish has been caught. 5'7", 1341. And she weighs 2.46. And here we got John Snow, one of those fish that likes to hang out around the dock. And John will pretty much eat anything. Frogs, worms, chatterbaits, swim baits, and even crawfish. Oh, right here. Got him. I was just about to pull it in. He must have been watching it. Couldn't decide if he wanted to eat it or not. Spawning activity from this female. 5'7", 0827. And weighs 2.05 pounds. And here we got Unit, another fish that lives and hangs out right around the dock. Alright, so we got a game plan. So the bluegill feeders are about to go off here in just a moment, and 3 of the biggest bass we caught during the survey were right out here in front of the feeders. So even if they live out here by the structure, the feeder pulls them up. So we're going to put the jumbo crawfish on and pitch it out right when the feeder goes off, so it's guaranteed to be seen by a big bass. Alright, here we go. Well folks, the crawfish didn't lure Bonnie or Clyde in this time, but I'm determined now more than ever to to catch one of them so we can see how big they've gotten. Alright folks, out here doing a crawfish boil, and these are the type I like. Just Friday afternoon, quick crawfish boils, just enough for the family. We probably got about 10 to 15 pounds right here. So I cook for big groups of people a lot, 200 and 300 pounds, and it's stressful, but these are the cooks I enjoy. So the one quick tip I'll give you, if you're doing the smaller crawfish boils, you don't necessarily always have to fill the pot up with water like I did. You can if you want to keep the seasoning the same all the time, but the truth is you just have to fill it up just enough to where it'll get above the crawfish. So if you want to save even more time, you go less water, less seasoning, for fewer crawdaddies. Once that water gets rolling, it's time to put them in, bring it back to a boil, let it sit for 17 minutes, and now it's time to eat. Man, that looks good. And if you missed it, in one of our previous videos, we planted some sawtooth acorns. And look at there, we finally got some growth. Little baby trees sprouting out of the pots. And I checked back on them a couple days later, and I'm surprised at how fast they're growing. But with all that rain and then sunshine, that's how it works. Alright, now let's check in on the squirrel house, and Gus the mouse has absolutely wrecked it. He piled up all the furniture from the kitchen over here in a corner, and then started building a nest around it. And take a look at Chip when he comes up to look at it every day. You can just see the confusion all over his face. He said, "We had a nice clean house in here. Now look what you've done to it." I'm out of here. But Gus comes back every night, back in nest building mode. Alright, got my little buddy Oliver out here today, and we're working on a project where we're building some planters for Liz's garden. And as me and Liz cut the wood, the kids are taking it off, building something of their own. Like to see them using that imagination though. Good work day with the family out here on the farm. Even Oliver's got his own little pile of wood over there. And my guess is Sarah built a nice big fence. And here you can see, like mother, like daughter. Both of them in the building mood today. But alright, we got some planters built. It's about time to get everything filled up with dirt. We got them all lined out over here by their water source. And we filled the bottoms with filler material like cardboard to keep any of that dirt from coming out. And I'll have to say, pretty impressed with Liz and her parents' seeds. They planted all of these plants from seeds earlier this year. And so we'll be removing some of these into the planters. We got a big variety here. Looking good. Alright, loading dirt into the planters. For the bottoms, we're using some of that red soil just as a filler. And then for the top, we're coming in with a lot higher quality soil to help those plants grow. Out here doing a little cutting today. But the work is done. We got 5 of them filled up, ready for planting. And then over in this area, we put down the mulch for watermelons and things like that. Oliver said enough work for today. He's ready to get in the boat and maybe even do a little fishing. You sitting there with your hands on your hips like an old man. So all these flowers have budded from the winter crops, and we're getting an early look at what this summer's going to look like in our wildflower field. But you can see we've got the pollinators out here in full force. Butterflies dangling around on the limbs. The bumblebees are buzzing. And man, look at that butterfly work. These guys are pretty fast and efficient. It's pretty impressive. Alright, now let's check out Bonnie's Bayou. We got the raccoons making their way around the pond. Now let's check in on some of the deer cameras. Boy, we've got the whole group out here today. I like seeing it when all the bucks and does are mixed in together, now that the rut's completely over. But feeding these deer a lot of protein is definitely paying off. Here in South Alabama, the type of deer you see on the left is not very common. The one on the right is much more common, but it just goes to show if they have the right source of food, they can also achieve that good antler growth. But that 8-point is a new buck that's recently showed up in the area. And the 10-point that you're going to see on the right here, he's a local and has been here the past couple of years, and has been one of the dominant bucks. But you know, whenever a new one shows up, it's just one of those things that deer do. They got to fight it out and see which one of these guys has the rights to this turf. And it is a little bit unusual to see them fighting like this after the rut, but like I said, I think it's because the new deer just showed up. But man, they put on a good show tonight. They probably fought for about 20 minutes. And then after that, they said they'd had enough. You got the 8-point on the left, and then the 10-point back there in the back. Now everybody's getting along. But there's a good shot of the 8-point during daylight. He's a nice one. Alright folks, if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with all these ponds, tiger bass, and bald eagles. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.